arrive in force, and here is where the story truly becomes dangerous. For while most species prefer to measure twice and cut once, humanity delights in cutting first, then cutting again, then wondering aloud why everything around them is bleeding. Their fleets were assembled with remarkable speed ships, soar, pulled from orbital docks with paint still drying, weapons calibrated in half-sleep by technicians who could barely read the manuals. Soldiers were drafted from suburbs and farmlands, told that they were now the sword of Earth, though most had never even been outside their own country, let alone their own planet. But enthusiasm compensates for training, at least according to human doctrine. And they had enthusiasm in grotesque abundance. Entire media networks fed the flames, spinning the death of the leader into a tale of martyrdom and cosmic insult. They showed his smiling photographs next to stock images of alien monsters. The leader himself had never been especially popular, but death is the greatest marketing strategy humans ever invented, and so his memory was instantly elevated to sainthood. Citizens volunteered in droves, some driven by patriotism, others by the thrill of adventure, others simply because it was the only employment offering free meals and insurance. Humanity loves nothing more than a grand project, especially one that promises violence dressed as justice. And so the drums of war began to beat loudly enough to echo across the stars. Meanwhile, among the alien archives, where some historians chronicled every folly of lesser civilizations, there was hushed panic, for those who knew humanity knew that their strength was not in their machines, nor in their strategies, but in their sheer refusal to play by the rules of civilized species. When cornered, they bite. When mocked, they laugh. When mocked, they laugh. When wounded, they sharpen their knives and charge. And here they were sharpening millions of knives at once, entire fleets of them, hurtling toward the void in search of a target, any target that would satisfy the primal itch for revenge. It is important to note that no one had expected humanity to be humanity to survive this long in the galactic theater. They were supposed to remain a provincial species, amusing perhaps, but inconsequential instead. They had spread their noise to every system. They could reach trading music and weapons with equal enthusiasm. Their art baffled scholars, their politics horrified diplomats. Their humor made even warlords uneasy. And yet here they were marching toward war, not because of a grand cause or sacred principle, but because someone had dared to remind them of their mortality. This is perhaps the central truth of humanity that alien scholars struggle to grasp. To kill one would they? But to grasp human is to invite tears, to kill their leader is to invite apocalypse. And so the galaxy braced itself as Earth declared through speeches and banners and propaganda that they would not rest until justice was served. Never mind that justice was undefined. Never mind that the true assassin remained here. Unidentified. Never mind that the stars were filled with species far stronger and far older than Earth. The humans had chosen their narrative, and once chosen, a narrative becomes destiny. Their fleets lifted into the void, shimmering against the black. Their soldiers cheered their anthem and mispronounced Gonsteros. Alien names with equal fervor, and somewhere in the shadows, the true assassin laughed, knowing that whatever the outcome, they had unleashed something far greater than death. They had awakened humanity's favorite pastime, proving once again that nothing is more dangerous in this galaxy than a species that turns grief into vengeance and vengeance into theater. The fleets did not glide into the void with elegance or symmetry. As the fleets of older civilizations did, they lurched into it like stampeding cattle disguised as war machines. Their trajectories crooked, their supply lines tangled their command. Structures already riddled with contradictions, yet this was not a weakness. It was their essence, for humans thrive in chaos, the way mold thrives on forgotten bread. And so as they spread outward into the galactic stage, the other species watched with mingled fascination and dread, wondering which unfortunate world would be chosen as the canvas for Earth's performance of justice. The generals debated strategy and language that barely qualified as strategy, and in the absence of consensus, they simply chose everything at once, an approach that in human history had often succeeded, not because it was intelligent, but because it overwhelmed opponents who assumed rationality. Their ships split into task forces, some darting toward the Gralith borders, others toward Drevia, others toward whichever star systems had offended them on social media. For humans, measure insult on scales incomprehensible to other species. The soldiers aboard these ships spent their transit time training, which in practice meant arguing over card games, recording video messages about their heroism before they had done anything heroic, and composing songs that were half parody, half war anthem. Entire platoons bonded over shared ignorance of where exactly they were being sent. A feature rather than a flaw, since humans prefer stories where the ending is uncertain. Alien scholars studying these deployments recorded them with the precision of entomologists observing insects. Yet unlike insects, humans change their behavior when observed, sometimes deliberately, to confuse the observers, sometimes because they forgot what they were doing in the first place. This unpredictability made them uniquely horrifying. One moment they would weep over their fallen leader. The next, they would turn him into a punchline, then back into a saint. And somehow, these contradictions fueled them rather than fractured them back on Earth. The media continued to broadcast every movement of the fleets, accompanied by stirring commentary that bore no resemblance to the truth. But truth was never the goal. The goal was participation, to make every civilian feel that their angry comment on a digital forum was itself part of the war effort. Mothers sent their sons into orbit while telling interviewers that they were proud. Though their eyes betrayed terror, politicians stood before flags and promised swift victory against enemies they had not even named. The assassination itself had already faded into myth, now spoken of as if it had been a cosmic insult rather than a single precise act of violence. And here lay the irony, for the assassin, who had executed the leader with the detached professionalism of a surgeon, had intended to destabilize Earth, perhaps even frighten it into silence. Instead, they had given it the greatest gift one can give to humanity: a reason to unify and a justification for violence. Humans need very little excuse to turn disarray into momentum, and so the fleets thundered forward. The first encounter came not with the Greylith or Drevians, but with an outpost belonging to the Harkeen, a reptilian race fond of bureaucracy and allergic to improvisation. They had not been on any suspect list, but their unfortunate station orbited in the exact path of the human armada, and therefore it became history's first example of what scholars later called incidental annihilation. The Harkeen sent queries forms and requests for clarification, but the humans interpreted this as defiance and obliterated the station within hours. The news of this massacre spread quickly across the stars, accompanied by human press releases that described it as a glorious victory over tyranny. Never mind that the Harkeen had no idea what they were supposedly guilty of. What mattered was that humanity had drawn blood, and in doing so confirmed its narrative. Now, the war had momentum, and momentum is the one thing humans worship more than gods. The galaxy began to calculate responses. Older species debated whether to intervene, whether to attempt diplomacy, whether to crush Earth before its chaos metastasized. But caution prevailed, for no one wanted to be the next incidental target. Some whispered that the assassin must have been human after all, for who else could so perfectly predict that the death of a single leader would ignite such a disproportionate storm? But this theory was suppressed quickly, for it was frightening to imagine that humans would kill their own leader simply to justify expansion. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship of the Central Fleet, General Harrow sat in his command chair, sipping instant coffee that tasted of cardboard and contemplating maps that refused to make sense. Harrow was not brilliant, but he was stubborn, and in the human hierarchy, stubbornness often triumphs over brilliance. He believed that somewhere out there, the guilty species waited, cowering in the shadows, and it was his destiny to drag them into the light. His subordinates pretended to share his conviction, privately doubting everything. But humans have an extraordinary ability to doubt inwardly and obey outwardly simultaneously. And so orders were given, ships veered toward new systems. Messages were broadcast into the void demanding surrender from civilizations that had not been accused of anything, and Earth cheered from afar. It is here that one must pause and marvel, for humanity was not strong by galactic standards. Their technology lagged, their fleets were disorganized. Their leadership was fragile, and yet they advanced as though invincible. The secret lay not in their power, but in their refusal to acknowledge weakness. They declared themselves righteous, and therefore they were, and righteousness, when wielded by a species addicted to improvisation, becomes a weapon sharper than plasma blades. Their enemies hesitated, and hesitation is the one gift you must never give to humans, because they will seize it, tear it open, and weaponize it before you even realize you have paused. Thus, the war expanded like fire, leaping across dry fields. Humanity did not search for the true assassin. They searched for satisfaction, and satisfaction for them could only be measured in ashes. The ashes of the Harkeen station still drifted silently in orbit, a quiet testament to how humans often confuse motion with progress and destruction with justice. Yet back on Earth, the event was hailed as a turning point in the cosmic war, a phrase endlessly repeated by commentators who needed turning points every hour to keep viewers awake. The president, or rather the new one hurriedly installed after the previous one had been converted into a martyr, delivered stirring speeches about courage and legacy, all while secretly praying that the assassin never revealed themselves, because the truth would ruin the narrative. The people, however, did not want truth. They wanted theater, and humanity is a species that has always preferred a good story to a dull fact. The fleets surged onward in all directions, creating more enemies. With every jump they made, their supply chains snapped like twigs. Their navigation systems collapsed under the weight of bad math, and their admirals often forgot which systems they were attacking and which they were defending. But none of this mattered, because the humans were busy recording victory songs in orbit, posting videos of their adventures with dramatic filters, and writing epic poems about battles that had not yet occurred for the alien civilizations watching from a safe distance. It was like witnessing a cosmic circus in which the clowns carried nuclear weapons. Some species prayed that the chaos would burn itself out. Others considered forming alliances, contain it, but most simply hid behind their borders and hoped the storm would pass the assassin. Meanwhile, observed in silence, delighting in the realization that they had engineered not just an assassination, but an unraveling for humans, unravel in the most spectacular fashion possible. They transform tragedy into propaganda, propaganda into mobilization, mobilization into bloodshed, and bloodshed into memory, which then repeats the cycle across generations. General Harrow, now drunk on both caffeine and destiny, declared that the Drevians must be guilty, after all, because they were insects, and insects and insects in human history are always pests. He issued commands for a campaign into Drevian space, though no one knew precisely where Drevian space began or ended, which made planning somewhat difficult. His officers tried to point out these logistical inconveniences, but Harrow dismissed them as cowardice. Reminding everyone that destiny does not require maps. Destiny requires only noise. The soldiers cheered, and the fleets stumbled forward like a battering ram swung blindly in the dark on Earth. The school children were taught that this was humanity's finest hour, that to avenge the fallen leader was to secure the dignity of the species as a whole. Never mind that most of them could not find Drevia on a map. They drew pictures of starships obliterating insectoid monsters and pinned them to classroom walls. The myth grew like mold in damp corners until it consumed every conversation, every broadcast, every dinner table debate. Even those who doubted the wisdom of war joined the chorus, because humans have an ancient fear of being the only voice of dissent and a choir of rage. By now, entire star systems had been scorched, not out of strategy but out of habit. For once humans unleash violence, they struggle. Remember what restraint feels like. Alien ambassadors tried desperately to reach Earth, but their messages were drowned out by the roar of patriotic songs blasting from every channel. Diplomats who did manage to land on Earth were paraded through press conferences where translators deliberately twisted their words to make them sound guilty. And when they protested that they had nothing to do with the assassination, humans laughed and accused them of lying. Because in human culture, denying guilt is practically an admission of it. The galaxy braced itself, wondering which empire would be swallowed next. while the assassins sharpened their smile in the shadows, knowing that the brilliance of their plan was not the death of a leader, but the revelation of what humanity truly was, a storm disguised as a species, a storm that had now been given purpose and permission to rage. The storm disguised as a species raged with such commitment that even the assassin who had engineered it began to wonder whether they had accidentally invited an extinction event upon the galaxy rather than a controlled disturbance, for humanity had reached that curious phase where vengeance and exploration blurred into the same act, where every new world was either a shrine to their grief or a canvas for their fury. The Drevians, who had done nothing more offensive than evolve with 6 legs, suddenly found themselves under a rain of human firepower, broadcast live back to Earth, where commentators analyzed the battles like sporting events, pausing only to cut to advertisements for snack food and patriotic merchandise. The Drevians attempted reason, they offered gifts. They pleaded that they had never even heard of Earth's leader, let alone killed him. But humanity heard only noise and interpreted that noise as defiance. Within weeks, entire hives were scorched into memory, and the survivors scattered into exile. And yet the irony was that these acts of supposed justice only deepened the mystery of the assassination, for no evidence, no confession, no single clue emerged to point at the guilty hand, and still the humans pressed onward with a zeal that required no proof. Their historians began rewriting the past, insisting that their leader had been a giant of history, that his death marked the beginning of a new human destiny, though in truth, most of them had despised him while he was alive, such as the peculiar human gift to sanctify the dead, while ignoring the living General Harrow basked in the glow of his own importance, striding across the bridge of his flagship as if he were already immortal, yet within his private thoughts, he admitted that the enemy was less important than was less important than the performance itself. What mattered was that Earth now stood at the center of galactic attention, and for humans, attention has always been the most addictive drug. When the fleets began to falter, when supplies ran dry, when ships began to turn homeward, broken and battered, the narrative on Earth shifted not toward defeat, but toward triumph. Every burned planet was declared liberated. Every casualty was honored as a volunteer in a holy cause. Every retreat was renamed a tactical redeployment, and the citizens believed it, because belief was more comforting than truth. The galaxy, meanwhile, quaked. Some civilizations began arming in secret, whispering that Earth had revealed itself to be the most dangerous of all species, not because of its strength, but because of its madness. Others considered alliances of containment, but hesitated for fear that their very act of alliance would make them the next target of human rage. The assassin at last revealed themselves, though not in the way anyone expected. They did not step forward with a confession or a demand. They simply released a single message across the galactic network, a message that consisted of only 3 words. You were predictable. Scholars still debate whether the assassin was alien or human, whether they were a lone agent or a faction within Earth itself, but the answer no longer mattered, for the damage was complete. Humanity had demonstrated to the galaxy what it was capable of when wounded, and that knowledge could never be unlearned on Earth. The message was twisted into yet another justification proof. They declared that the enemy had admitted guilt, and so they celebrated as if victorious, never realizing that they were dancing to a tune composed by someone else. The fleets limped home, welcomed as conquerors, though halfway Mayafurs destroyed. The new president stood on podiums bathed in applause while privately calculating how to manage the chaos that would follow, for the true legacy of this war was not victory, nor justice, nor even vengeance, but the birth of a reputation. Humanity was now known across the stars, not as explorers, nor as diplomats, nor as inventors, but as the unpredictable storm, the species that turns grief into theater and theater into blood. The assassin had truly assassinated was not a man, but an illusion. The illusion that Earth could ever be ignored. The galaxy would never make that mistake again. And as the human fleets settled back into orbit with broken hulls and triumphant songs, the stars themselves seemed to shiver as if aware that this was only the first act of a performance that would echo for centuries.